First of all, Brad, before we talk about the recent ongoings of Cage Warriors, congratulations on the 10-year anniversary. Before we go any further,
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
um,
it's kind of crept up on me, that one. But it sort of does every year. It's like it just seems like a bigger and bigger chunk of my life. But no, happy to be here still, happy to have the privilege of narrating so many great moments over the years and hopefully do another 10. Let's see.
yeah, absolutely. Great moments is a good transition into this London card that we had this past weekend. I don't want to spend too much time on it because depending on when this comes out and stuff, you know, as you know very well, it is very much one event ends and then what everyone's talking about the next big thing. But the one thing I wanted to talk about, I was recording with Modestus earlier today, and he mentioned about how it just seems like this year is the year of the left hook counter. And I admittedly hadn't watched any of Giannis Picard before he arrived in Cage Warriors, and it's kind of difficult to watch fights when you're also doing interviews and things like that. But I thought Amir Brown started that main event so well. And so when that shot landed, it was like you hear like, oh, he caught him and you didn't no one saw it coming. You hear that kind of thing a lot. But I in between kind of doing interviews, I was like, oh, this fight is going kind of the way I expected to. Emil's landing often. So admittedly, haven't gone back and listened to your commentary of the fight, but your reaction because Janis Bakar in two fights in Cage Warriors looks like he might not be around too much longer.
Yeah, absolutely. The guy's I guess he's a bit of an unknown quantity. He's got plenty of fights, but he's fought quite sporadically. He's had, big long gaps. So whenever you have a guy like that, it's always an unknown quantity because you don't know where he is, you don't know how sharp he is. Like, all right, we know he's got the skills, but what happens when he comes up against that guy who's just going to push him that little bit harder? Is there going to be cage rust? Is the lack of form going to hurt him? And so far, the answer is no. Right? I don't think many people were betting on him to beat Carlo Pedersoli Jr. in Rome. He walked right into the lion's den and did that after a big gap in competition. And then same thing against Emil. Emil's like the young up and coming guy, a lot of hype behind him. Obviously, Renegade at the moment, one of the most hyped gyms in the sport, and rightly so. And we all know what Emil can do to people. You take one wrong shot from that guy, and all of a sudden you're counting sheep. It's a terrifying prospect. But you've got to give Yanis Bassar credit. He kept his cool. He blocked a lot of those punches. At first watch, you're like, oh wow, he's going to get iced. But you watch it back, and he does actually catch a lot of those on the gloves. But that the fear was that it was turning into a massacre, like he was just going to get absolutely ran through. So for him to flip the script completely, and that's a perfect shot. If they fight 10 times, does that happen 10 times? No, but it happened that time, and that's all that counts at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love those as much as seeing a person come through Cage Warriors and then get that title is such a big moment. You seem to get that, and then 50% of the time you get someone coming out of nowhere, and you're like, this guy suddenly now going to be one of the most talked about guys coming out of Europe, and no one would have seen that coming a year ago. I mean, beating Pedersoli and then beating Emil Brown is an incredible way to do it because, like you said, a lot of people were expecting Emil to finally reach that, but as we kind of spoke about backstage, it was like Emil's had two losses in Cage Warriors, and both times he's come back and looked so much better, I think. So I still expect really big things out of him and excited to see what's next for that division. Of course, on the same night, we had the UFC, particularly relevant because the UK has a new world champion in Tom Aspinall, who he of course called a few of his fights, and I was thinking back to when I interviewed Tom for when I was doing stuff for Cage Warriors, and the thing that struck me the most was how kind of nonchalant he was about a lot of the fight game. He was just kind of like he was just showing up, getting the job done, and was like, "I just want to fight, so let me fight." Which is crazy because then you hear him talk about the anxiety and stuff that he faces before a fight, and that makes it way more impressive. But what was your kind of impressions of coming across Tom? Because there was a lot of talk about him, but it was also a frustrating time in his career around that time because he just couldn't get fights at that time.
Yeah, look, heavyweight MMA is really weird. There, especially in this country, and to an extent in other places as well. There just aren't that many guys out there. And if you look at like So Tom's training camp now, for example, all the big lads in the
Yeah.
UK train with Tom, right? So, if you're one of those big lads, you're probably not going to fight another one of the big lads because you're all training together, and that's always been the case. And you see it, you see it still with a lot of the women's divisions as well. They've either already fought each other or they train together. So yeah, you can understand like the struggle, and that's what makes heavyweight MMA such a game of inches because you'll fight the guys that you can regionally, and then that step up is suddenly huge. It's not like a welterweight or a featherweight where there's hundreds and hundreds of guys that you can level up slowly. Like you have to take big leaps and take big risks, and obviously the risks in heavyweight MMA are pretty much as big as they come. That's not to say that flyweights can't knock people out, but heavyweights is one shot can change everything, as we saw. But I think Tom's all about taking those risks, and it's cool to see him talk about his fear and stuff, but he's clearly embracing it. And let's not forget, like he's literally grown up in the fight game, right? His dad, one of the OG Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. And it was probably inevitable that Tom was going to be a professional combat sports athlete, whether it was MMA or jiu-jitsu, and obviously flirted with boxing for a while as well. I guess when you've grown up in it and around it, it is kind of just a job, you're going through the motions, but to see him get that win and knowing how hard he's worked over the years, I was calling Tom's fights when he was an amateur and seeing the progression. And you can some guys you can just see them as amateurs and you just know there's something special. And seeing them complete that journey and take home the UFC title. I'm not even going to call it the interim title. I don't think it is. At the end of the day, John Jones isn't fighting. He's probably never going to fight whoever the champion is. He's going to do the Stipe fight and retire. So let's call that what it is. It's a legacy fight, and let's call Tom the heavyweight champion of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. This just popped into my mind when you were saying it because I was going to say about how much of an incredible moment it must be. And you've had so many of them. I've seen these guys where you've called their fights since the amateur days go on and accomplish these incredible things, right? I mean, 2.5 weeks notice at Madison Square Garden, Tom Aspinall's the heavyweight champion of the world. Like, it literally doesn't get any bigger than that. But I suppose because I don't know if I'll speak to you before then, I should quickly reference the fact that we have another one of the guys that has been through the absolute ringer of Cage Warriors and come out as a superstar. Of course, Paddy Pimblett is going to be back at 296. I recorded a video on this earlier, and it is still crazy to me to be saying the words Paddy Pimblett is fighting Tony Ferguson. Like if you told me that like 3 years ago, and again I've been watching Paddy for a long time, I would have been like, there must be someone else named Tony Ferguson. Like that's insane. Obviously, like just the fact that he's fighting in Vegas and the UFC is incredible. But Tony Ferguson, like that must be crazy for you as well, considering you've seen him fight in, I imagine, like sports halls and things like that. To now, here he is in Vegas fighting one of the biggest names
Yeah,
in the division.
I mean, I've known Paddy since he was probably about 15 or something, and
Yeah,
seeing like he's completed the game, right? He's always going to be one of those guys that you either love him or you hate him, or he's probably got as many haters as he's got fans, and I don't think he cares because at the end of the day, he's cashing those checks, right? He's got his nice house and his partner, and expecting twins now. So how can you not say he's completed the game? Like fighting a guy like Tony Ferguson, like that is something that for most fighters they will literally just dream about it. Like obviously a lot of guys will get to Cage Warriors, and a smaller number of guys will get to the UFC, and a smaller number still will get these fights with legends of the sport or fights for world titles. Right? It's a very very small number of people get these opportunities, and I know for a fact like Paddy is. Like, if you think you're an MMA nerd, like Paddy Pimblett will go pound for pound on MMA trivia with you. He is such a fan of MMA first and foremost. I guarantee that 10 years ago, like when I knew 15-year-old Paddy, for example, he's going to have been watching that first season of The Ultimate Fighter that Tony Ferguson was on. Was that season 7 or whatever it was? Anyway, it's a long time ago. But I guarantee that Paddy will have been watching those fights and has been a fan of Tony Ferguson. So getting to fight an idol like that, it's just awesome, and getting to do it on a huge card. Um, and just in the spotlight that he's been able to create for himself is just fantastic. It brings me a massive amount of joy to see his success, and yeah, I can't wait to see the fight. I get very it's nice to be able to take my professional hat off and watch these guys when they're fighting outside the Cage Warriors because I can actually enjoy their fights as a fan. But I get pretty into them when like Paddy and Molly and people like that are fighting, and it's like someone you've known a long time. It's you get caught up in it. I've nearly flipped the furniture a few times for Paddy's fights. His UFC debut literally nearly put the coffee table through the window. It was great.
The thing that always fills me with joy is for so long it felt like, Paddy was such a big deal in the UK, and he was getting kind of interest here and there from outside of the UK, but really everyone in UK MMA knew he was a big deal. The thing that makes me so happy is that he's been able to go to the UFC, and from the moment he debuted, it was like, here's your new superstar, right? Like, it would have been, as much as we all would have been so happy to see him just get to the UFC after everything he had gone through around in regards to the UFC and signing and not signing, all that stuff. But for him to go there and for it to just immediately translate and just take off is like, I don't know. It feels like justified that it was like, we knew he was a big deal, but now everyone does. Like, I just didn't expect it to be that quick.
Yeah, look, he's made for it. He's always been made for it. He always needed to be in there, and I think he went at the right time. I think I understand why people want to get there because of the fame, the money, and the opportunities. But I would honestly say to someone like, if you can take those extra few fights before you get there, do it because you can't buy experience. There's no amount of money that will buy that experience. But I think Paddy went at the right time, and as you say, like the second he clicked in there, he just became almost part of the furniture for MMA. Everyone knows who he is now, right? But I remember this like back in the day when he was headlining the Cage Warriors arena shows in Liverpool, and there was the big digital billboard outside Lime Street with his picture on, and you get in a taxi in Liverpool city centre that week. Every taxi driver knows Paddy or knows his next door neighbor or he's had him in the back of the cab, and that's the test for me. Like if taxi drivers are talking about you, you've kind of set that barrier, and Paddy did that in the UK, and as we've seen, he's gone and done it worldwide now, and yeah, couldn't be happy for him.
Yeah, it's great to see. To switch gears to the Newcastle card, because a big card to close off this busy schedule with three title fights, which I just didn't see coming, to be honest. Especially one of them, which we will get to. I definitely didn't see that coming towards the end of the year. But the one that interests me the most at the moment is the bantamweight title fight, because that bantamweight division has had so many top guys go through it in the last couple of years. We mentioned Paddy, one of his teammates, Liam Gittins and Reese McEwen, of course. Completely different trajectories, it feels like, in Cage Warriors, because Reese, it felt like every single fight he had in Cage Warriors, it was like he's one step closer to the belt. He's one step closer to the belt. Whereas Liam, I remember like earlier in his Cage Warriors career, he was like the guy that you look to put on the fight of the night because it was kill or be killed every time he got in there. And then every event that I would tune into or watch, I'd see Liam Gittins in there just picking up a solid win, just going about his business. And then, you'd speak to him in the media room afterwards and he'd be like, yeah, I just want to get back in there and keep doing my thing. And then suddenly, like, it didn't even cross my mind that he would be in this position. And yet it makes total sense. Like, do you think Liam Gittins has gone a bit under the radar? Because I asked Reese about this as well, and he kind of agreed, even though he recognizes he's a very good opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. Think if you go back to Liam's last fight, like we even said on the commentary, like I think we were talking because he's been fighting at featherweight a little bit. He's taken fights sort of up and down, and that's kind of been like something that he's done throughout his career. Even as an amateur, he was moving from flyweight to bantamweight, and obviously like now he's been doing bits of feather as well. And I think I was talking, along the lines of like, look, we're talking about Harry Hardwick and Jordan Vucenic and James Hendon and Tobias Harilla and Luke Riley. When are we going to start talking about Liam Gittins? Because that's four in a row now.
Yeah,
And then lo and behold, a few weeks later, obviously, the situation is Nathan Fletcher was supposed to be in this fight. And obviously Nathan unable to compete. And all of a sudden there's a slot opened up and Liam Gittins, who, part of Nathan's camp, part of his team, slips in. And it's, just one of those incredible like opportunity knocks kind of things. And look, we all know what Liam Gittins is about, right? He's not going to turn the fight down, and he's certainly not going to turn an opportunity like this down. What an upset of the apple cart it would be to end the year. Like not to say that the fight itself would be an upset if Liam Gittins won, just to say that a few months ago he was not scheduled to have this fight, and all of a sudden he could be ending the year as Cage Warriors world champion. Obviously, Reese McEwen's going to have something to say about that next Saturday night, but that's what we're all looking forward to.
Um, there's an element as well of coming slightly off the radar for both of the other title fights. The light heavyweight title fight, I guess we'll do next. Again, as doing
I'm
the
gonna have to
podcast.
stop you here, Kyle, because that fight is unfortunately no longer happening. Matty
Oh,
Byfield has unfortunately had to withdraw. There was talk of keeping Andy Clamp on the card, but the situation is that look, Byfield's earned a title shot, Clamp's earned a title shot. So Cage Warriors wanted to make that happen, and I think the situation was, Andy Clamp was offered a non-title fight, which didn't really make sense for him. And then I believe, as far as I know, what's going to happen is that fight will be remade for early next year. So, I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. I was really looking forward to it anyway. I think it's a real nice styles clash. It was great to see Andy, back to winning ways against Abdelnaby recently. That was a really tough fight, a really underrated guy, Abdelnaby, and Clamp just went straight through him. And that's the end. That's the Andy Clamp living up to his full potential. It's Andy's story to tell, but he had a lot of challenges to get to that fight, and it really went down to the wire. Um, so to see him not only get to compete, but get his hand raised in such emphatic fashion was fantastic. And Byfield's a guy who has just been plugging away, and you've got to respect that. It's just taking the fights, getting the wins, doing what's necessary, fighting tougher and tougher guys, and the Byfield versus Clamp for me, so it's a fight that's coming at a perfect time in both guys' careers. So fingers crossed, we'll see that in the first quarter of next year. Yeah, I can't wait for it.
absolutely. I should double check before we put this interview out. Do we need to wait for that to be official? Do you know roughly when that is going to be made official that the fight isn't happening, or did I miss it? I don't think I did. Right.
No, I don't. I don't think you missed it. I think it's just a case of they were like sort of considering rematching Andy, so
Right.
nothing was really said about it yet. But I mean, we're still on. I believe we're on 19 fights on this card, so there'll be like an official press release going out early next week with the sort of the quote unquote final running order. Obviously, we don't know what happens at the weigh-ins and anything happening on fight week, but yeah, 19 fights should be locked in, and we should have the order and everything by next week.
Cool. We will wait until next week to put that out then, just in case. These things happen. Talk about unpredictable. I didn't see this middleweight title run coming from Mick Stanton, but this kind of Indian summer in his career has been incredible to see. Like not only winning the title, but that title defense against James Webb. I really thought that during that fight that it was the changing of the guard was going to happen, right? James Webb was going to take that title back and have a second reign as the champion, and then Mick Stanton, the guy just doesn't read the script. I don't know what else to say about him. It's incredible at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough not to like Mick, and his story is just fantastic. It's just one of perseverance, right? Again, he's a guy who's just kept plugging away. What I love about Mick Stanton at the moment is that like he just seems really, really happy and with what he's doing, and a happy fighter is always a dangerous fighter, right? Like he's just clearly enjoying training, enjoying competing as often as possible. I think at middleweight he's on 7 in a row now. So this potentially, if he gets the victory here tonight, 8 wins in a row, 185 pounds, which is fantastic. And just a few years back when he sort of lost quite comprehensively to James Webb, you wouldn't have guessed that he'd be on a 7-fight middleweight winning streak with the title wrapped around his waist, and to do it in such great fashion as well. It's like how'd you beat this guy? How'd you game plan for Mick Stanton now? Because you look at the Will Curry fight where he's fighting a physical beast and giving up his back to get sweet, and just being a sort of general nightmare on the ground for Will in the sort of later half of that fight. And then you look at the Webb fight where he's getting a knockout like the old Mick Stanton. It's like, what do you want to stand in front of him? Do you want to risk going to the ground with him? Like, how do you fight this guy? And look how badly he got hurt. I thought I thought James Webb was a couple of punches away from finishing him. We've seen Stanton hurt to the body before, but then all of a sudden, bam, he's straight back in it. It's not often you see guys go down from big body shots like that and not only survive but come back to get a finish against a guy as tough as James Webb as well.
Yeah, incredible. That card is looking fantastic to close that out. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to keep you for too long. But the final thing I wanted to touch on, because I probably won't speak to you until next year, I just wanted to see if there was any particular highlights that stand out to you throughout this year as we kind of close it all out. To the one that always jumps out to me from this year. I didn't go to the last Manchester card, but I went to the one before, and I remember watching Luke Riley versus Callum Parker and thinking that fight's ridiculous. That's one of the best fights I've ever seen live. To use a pro wrestling term, he's like Cage Warriors' very own best bout machine, right? Luke Riley's on the
Yes.
card. You tune in to watch him. And then I'm sat there watching from home as he goes on and puts on not just the best fight I've seen in Cage Warriors this year, one of the best fights I've seen this year, period, against Alexander Loof. That was ridiculous. Luke Riley this year has been gold across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as you said that, my mind immediately popped to Luke Riley. Yeah, he's had what's it, two or three fights this year, and they've all been absolute bangers. He fought Malta in London, the training
Nice.
partner of Jose Aldo. That was a cracking fight as well. Uh, of the three, that's probably. I mean, I don't want to say the worst one because it was a
Yeah.
great fight, but when you're going up against two absolutely nailed on fight of the year contenders, one of them unfortunately is going to have to be not as good as the others. And the Callum Parker one was crazy. I mean, fair play to Callum Parker, right? Taking that on
Yeah.
like a week's notice. It wasn't even a week, I don't think. It was, literally like that fight was they shook hands on it and booked him a flight on the same call, I think. And he just came, because obviously he's English, but he lives in America. So he came straight over and, got in and didn't only do rounds, but, he put it on Luke Riley. That's the first time we've seen Riley in trouble, I think. So then you're thinking, right, that's it. That's your fight of the year contender done. That's probably one of the fight of the year contenders done. And then he comes in with Loof and has that absolute war. Like Loof is another guy I've had my own for a long time. My good friend Ricky Wright MC's over on Fight Club Rush, and he's been sort of telling me you've got to keep an eye on this guy. Um, and then, you see exactly what happens when you put two guys in like that. I mean, I could watch that fight. I probably have watched it back about 15 times, but you'll never get bored of it. I don't think it's one of those fights. It reminds me of like Korean Zombie Leonard Garcia. It's one of those fights that you show people that aren't MMA fans and be
Yeah.
like, if you don't find this exciting, like check your pulse, man. This is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, Luke's had a great year. I'm glad to see him take a bit of time off. Obviously, he had to have his hand surgery. I understand that's all gone really well. I'm glad to see him take a little bit of a break. Obviously, he's still a young guy. Had a few crazy fights. But look, I think if we're having this conversation this time next year, we're saying, well, UFC London in March 2025, Luke Riley's going to be on that card.
Yeah. And he is another one of those people that are moving to the UFC. I think whether the results go his way early on, whatever, I just feel like from watching him in Cage Warriors, I'm like, I don't know how people aren't going to fall in love with this guy because he's putting on multiple fight of the year contenders in the same year. Like, what more can you ask for? And especially the fact that he is so close to Paddy and Molly as well. Like, it just feels like them bringing along the next generation is like, if you liked us, get ready for this guy because the man is absolutely dynamite every time he steps in there. Is there anybody else that jumps out to you, Brad? I understand it must be difficult. So I apologize for putting you on the spot because there's so many names in my head going around right now that I can't even imagine.
It's wild. Like, I'm in the middle of like prep for, doing sort of research and stuff for 40 fighters next weekend. And
Yeah,
that's like that's just mad. But like, we've been doing a card every 2 weeks in September. There's a heck of a lot going on. I think Sean Da Silva, everyone's new favorite fighter, right? Like the
yeah,
the impression that he made coming out. Obviously like, he debuted at Unplugged. A lot of hype behind him, and his personality is just completely infectious. Like we're sort of petitioning in the office at the moment to just get Sean Da Silva at every fight week, just whether he's fighting or not, just to be there to like cheer everyone up because you can't help but like he's just so like he's got one of those infectious personalities. He walks in the room and within seconds, everyone's smiling, everyone's talking to him, everyone's laughing. Yeah, just a super cool guy. And to go out there and beat a guy like Gerardo Funny the way he did, an incredible fight on a night of incredible fights. Yeah, I see big things in his future. It's been a good year for him. Yeah, look, Stanson's had a great year. Let's see how he finishes it next Saturday. But you know, as someone who, again, I've known Mick for a very, very long time, since he was an amateur, seeing him have this success is heartwarming. You know, being there unplugged when he won the title, and it's a very intimate setting. Not really, there's only sort of a few invited guests, and he was there, and he had all his family there, and it was just a really nice moment. It makes all the hard work worth it. But look, some of the guys we've got coming through, some of the guys coming up through Italy, the likes of Teddy Stringer. It's going to be a big year for him next year. I think, there's never going to be a shortage. If you're asking me at the end of a year to pick someone who's had a good year in Cage Warriors, there's always going to be that conveyor belt of guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see what is coming up next year for Cage Warriors. I'm sure that there will be. I know that I can't ask this question because you can't say anything, but I'm going to anticipate that the schedule is just as busy, if not more. I would imagine.
It's certainly, yeah, certainly a thing. It's certainly a schedule. Uh, I understand that you will be hearing about it very, very soon, though. So keep an ear out of the next week or two. Keep an eye out, and yeah, some dates for 2024 will be dropping imminently. But yeah, it's from what we're hearing, what we're seeing, it's looking like it's gonna be another busy year.
Good stuff. Love to hear it. Brad, thank you so much for your time, as always, mate. And we'll hopefully catch you at one of the many Cage Warriors events coming up in 2024.
Look forward to it, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, mate. Have a good rest of your night. See you later.